Well, hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much for joining me today. And I'm really excited to talk about inclusive design within the theme of the event, which is En Comunidad, in community. So we're going to talk a little bit about the whole spectrum of inclusive design, accessible design, accessibility, and then try to kind of formulate a framework and some bullet points, really some tips and tricks on how can we use these principles to build a more inclusive community, which Lord knows, this is what we need these days in the United States. So, pleasure to meet you. My name is Javi. I'm really excited to be here with you. I'm originally from Puerto Rico. My family is Boricua, proud Boricua. I grew up in Florida, and I now live in Washington, D.C. I'm a designer by trade, and for about 7 years, I was a teacher. I taught UX and product design full-time to adults who are changing careers, and now I am working kind of consulting or really partnering with startups and startup founders to kind of help them get their dreams and their products up and running and going, and making sure that we're addressing the audience that we intend to, and the audience that's the right audience for whatever it is that they're building or offering. So really excited about this. A quick little agenda as we get going. We're going to talk a little bit about accessibility. I'm going to try to do just a light touch on those kinds of things. This is, after all, a tech event, so I don't want to bore the people who know a lot about these topics. At the same time, I want to make sure that we have a kind of a ground level understanding of accessibility, of inclusive design for those who don't, right? So we can kind of carry on the discussion. So we're going to talk about accessibility. We're going to talk a little bit about inclusive design. What's the difference? How do they fit together? And then we're going to try to kind of apply this to community spaces. How can we be better neighbors, really, essentially? So that is the game plan for today. And hopefully, if I don't talk too much, we might have some time for questions at the end. But please, if anything, find me on LinkedIn. My name is Javi Calderon. It's down here at the bottom left. And this is my email as well. I would love to hear from you. At the end, I have my little LinkedIn QR code, and we can definitely connect. So what is inclusive design? We're going to kind of start there and back up a little bit. There's a lot of, kind of classic tech, a lot of different definitions. And in my mind, there is a difference. There's a stark difference between what is accessibility and what is inclusive design. To me, inclusive design is about everybody, right? Making sure that everybody feels seen, everybody feels welcome, everybody is included, right, in whatever it is that we're designing. And design is really an act of being intentional towards solving a particular problem, right? So we could be designing an event. We could be designing a community space. We could be designing the basement of our apartment building to create a space for our neighbors and the people who live in the building, right? There are a lot of different ways that we can apply this concept of design and of inclusive design. And at the end of the day, really, what the crux of inclusive design is the fact, and it's not a bad thing, we're all a little bit different, right? We are all unique. This graphic comes from a wonderful diagram, but I chose the guys to show not everybody's the same, right? Not everybody's the same height. Not everybody's the same weight. Not everybody has the same background. Not even if you might be taller and a little bit heavier, your shoulders might be wider, your arms might be longer, right? You might have shorter legs, whatever it may be, right? We are all unique. No two people are exactly alike, and honestly, that is beautiful, right? So when we talk about design and we talk about creating people, design is, again, like the process of creating something for people ultimately to use. Otherwise, what are we doing? This is meant to be used, right? So doesn't it make sense? Doesn't it stand to reason that if we're designing for people, we should take all of this beautiful diversity and variety into account when we're designing for people? So all of this, right, this is related to usability. How easy is something to use? This is a fun little diagram. There's kind of a best practice or a set of principles. They're called heuristics or rules of thumb. And these are basically 10 usability heuristics for when we're creating products for the web or apps technology. right? And these are 10 basically best practices that we want to make sure that we're taking into account when we are designing these digital experiences. And ultimately, the goal is to create something that is easy for people to use, right? So all of this stuff fits together: usability, accessibility, inclusive design. And we're going to kind of break down those latter two and then kind of put it all together at the end. So again, remember, the thesis here is that we're all a little bit different, and that's wonderful, and that's beautiful, and that is great. There's obviously a lot of similarities between us as well, but we would, I think, be doing ourselves and anybody who is going to be a participant of what we create a disservice if we ignore the fact that we're a little bit different in some ways, right? Hey, change slide, my friends. So inclusive design begs the question of who might we be excluding by just not thinking about it, right? I'll tell you a quick little personal story. This year, I tore my Achilles tendon in my left heel, my left ankle. And boy, did that open my eyes, right? Suddenly, I couldn't walk. Suddenly, my left leg was not weight bearing, right? And I had to maneuver everything for a couple weeks through a wheelchair. And then I moved to a boot, and I could not put my foot down, and I was on one of those little knee scooters. Then I moved to crutches, so on and so forth, doing much better. I can't run yet, but that really opened my eyes to something that had been invisible to me in the past, which was the challenges of what happens if one of your feet don't work so well, right? I had to have my wife lower me into the shower. Right, that was something I'd never experienced, and I was completely ignorant to because it was outside of my lived experience. Right, the challenge of having to sit down on the toilet to kind of undress myself very uncomfortably, then to shift over to sit on the ledge of the bathtub, spin my legs around to get into the bathtub, to then prop myself up to sit on this stool. I was like, wow, I'm exhausted from just taking a shower, right? So when we're creating these experiences, when we're creating anything at all, we have to think about who might I be excluding without realizing it, right? How might I just because it's not part of my lived experience, that doesn't mean it's not part of somebody else's, right? So how can we go about being more aware of these things, aware of these little pockets of people that we might just be whispering to, hey, this isn't for you, but we don't mean to, right? It's just because that's not part of our own lived experience. So our goal is to make sure that everything we create, we do so from a lens, with the result being that anybody who interacts and engages with it truly does feel welcome, right? And I think in terms of our communities, that is paramount, right? We want to make sure that everybody feels represented, seen, welcome, safe, and valued in any kind of community space that we create. So getting into some definitions, a little bit about accessibility, a little bit about inclusive design. We're going to fit them all together. These are all related topics: usability, universal design, accessibility, inclusive design. Really, the latter two we're going to talk about today: accessibility and inclusive design. So just a quick definition, right? If inclusive design is the process of creating products, services, environments that are usable by as many people as possible, right? Kind of taking into account the full spectrum of human diversity and ability, making sure that everybody is included from one edge case to the other, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Accessibility, much more formally and as a practice now, as a business practice, is much more focused on making sure that we create equitable access to people who are experiencing some sort of barrier from a temporary or long-term disability, right? And we'll get into some categories here in a second. Our first step, kind of like I said, is we're going to talk about accessibility, which is part of both the world of civic design and our world, right? Me as a designer in creating technologies. So when we talk about accessibility, again, we're focusing on making sure that we're including anybody whose body might work a little bit differently into our experiences, that we're not kind of taking it for granted of a one-size-fits-all approach, because guess what? One size fits nobody. So here we're really looking at making sure that we're giving people who are experiencing some sort of visual impairment, auditory or hearing impairment, cognitive impairment or some sort of physical or motor function disability, equal access and easy access to the technologies and experiences that we create, right? So some familiar things that we've all seen, right? And there's so many more. One thing that I find fascinating, right, is if you think about it, even a cane, a walking cane, even eyeglasses, right, are assistive devices, right? These are things that human beings have created hundreds, if not thousands of years ago to help us deal with our bodies maybe being a little bit different, right? If you look at, I don't know, Pirates of the Caribbean, right? You have a pirate wearing a peg leg. That is 500 years ago, 400 years ago, the pinnacle of innovation in terms of assistive devices, right? A peg leg, which I think is so much fun. But yeah, these devices, there's a whole world of devices out there to help us, hear a little bit better, walk a little bit better, move a little bit easier, so on and so forth. Like I said, a few months ago, I was using an assistive device. I was using a knee scooter to help me get around. So in the world of tech and accessibility, there's really kind of two categories of these technologies. We have direct access technologies and indirect access technologies. Direct access technologies we have become much more familiar with. They have kind of exploded onto the scene and really proliferated and are now pretty much ubiquitous. Direct access technologies are baked into our devices from the bat. So as I'm sure you know, our iPhones, Google phones, Samsung devices, all of our smartphones now come with a section of accessibility tools that allow us to manipulate and make changes to make that device work a little bit better for us. Indirect access technologies are usually coming in the form of a different device or a different technology that is then compatible with our computer, with our tablet, with our TV set in order to give us that functionality. So here you have some examples of some Braille readers, a Braille wearable, and a left-handed keyboard for somebody who is left-hand dominant might have some form of physical or motor function disability with their right hand. So this is a left-handed keyboard that allows somebody who is left-hand dominant to manipulate the keyboard fully using only their left hand. So on the web, accessibility takes kind of another level of how can we make websites, content easier to consume for people whose bodies or minds might work a little bit different than others. In these cases, we really, one of the biggest principles, and really there's various principles, but I wanted to kind of summarize, is the use of color, making sure that we're ensuring good color contrast, that the content that we display is legible, easy to read, doesn't hurt the eyes, but also making sure that we're not using color as a way of displaying information or as the only way to display information. Again, somebody might have color vision impairment, right? They might be colorblind, as we would say. So if we're telling them choose the red one or choose the green one, they might not be able to see. A wonderful example of that is our street lights, right? Our street lights actually use two ways to tell us information. Not only red, yellow, green, but also the order in which the light appears on the street light, right? I believe, I should have checked. I believe it's red, yellow, green, right? So even if you can't perceive the color, which light bulb is getting illuminated tells you whether it's time to go, time to stop, or depending on where you're from, or I guess we're all Latin here, it means step on the gas even harder, right? Not slow down, never slow down, right? Text sizing in tech has become a great accessibility tool. Our browsers now allow us to increase the size of our text in order to read it a little bit easier. And one that I think is really important kind of across the board is providing alternative forms of media and content. So for example, this is a video. Well, if somebody has hearing impairment issues, being able to therefore download an article or apply captions or subtitles is going to help them then consume that media, right? Maybe if you have vision impairment, listening to a audio recording is going to help us, right, consume that media in a different way. So a lot of people, or maybe not a lot of people, hopefully not a lot of people, working on accessibility, being mindful of accessibility in the past has been considered, or people have taken that it's not worth it, or that it's cumbersome, or that it's, a hindrance, right? Something that's kind of in the way. But some of the most ubiquitous innovations that we have created in technology, right, were originally assistive technologies. Things like subtitles and closed captioning, text messaging, voice to text, even FaceTime, right? All of these things that now everybody uses across the board were originally designed to help somebody who is experiencing some sort of body difference, right? Text messaging for people who are hard of hearing, right? If you can't hear the phone call, okay, I can now read the conversation. Right? If you have motor function impairment, maybe it's hard for you to type, right, on a tiny screen. Okay, voice to text, so on and so forth. So in the real world, this is, we've seen this everywhere now, right? Especially with the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, that now any kind of federal or government or local, state kind of space needs to have certain things in place to give everybody access. But we're really familiar with these. I'll come back to that. So things like ramps that we've seen, right? Accessible entrances, you press the button, the doors open. Walk signs, right, that tell you, hey, it is time to walk. It is time to walk. It is time to walk. Walk now, walk now, walk now, right? These were all originally designed as accessible tools, right, to give people who are navigating their local communities, an easier job of doing so. But, right, they were originally designed for a very specific audience. But guess what? All of these technologies, all of these innovations now have ubiquitous use, right? People pushing, moms, grandmas, grandpas pushing a stroller. People with their grocery carts, so on and so forth, right? Take advantage of ramps and curb cuts, which we'll go back to in a second. Anybody who's carrying a lot of stuff, right? Their arms are busy or encumbered, right? Can take advantage of that emergency or that assistable entrance. Maybe you just don't like touching stuff that a bunch of people have touched and haven't washed their hands. So you kind of elbow the entrance and let the door open. You're like, okay, glad I didn't have to touch that, right? And how about the guy who always has his face down on his phone, right? I've had to be saved from this. My wife literally had to pull me off the curb where I was about to get hit by a bus because I was looking down at my phone and walking into the street, right? So this all came about, and this is the common thread here, is this thing called the curb cut effect. So way back in the 70s, there was a big push by this guy named Ed Roberts. And there was pushes around the country otherwise, but this one got the most notoriety at UC Berkeley. Ed Roberts was wheelchair bound, and he realized how hard it was for him to get to class, and so much harder than it was for him than his classmates, because the streets really weren't designed to deal with his wheelchair. Right? So this is when curb cuts came into play. Curb cuts, as I'm sure you've experienced, are just a little dip in the street that allow the sidewalk to meet the road, to give anybody who is wheeling over here a suitcase, a bicycle, a grocery cart, deliveries, a wheelchair, allow them easy access back up onto the sidewalk, right? Again, first designed with people in mind who were using the use of wheelchairs, but guess what? Really everybody benefits. Nobody complains except for poor Javi, who one time when I was 15, I tried to test how fast I could ride my bicycle. And then I hit a curb cut. Yeah, it didn't end well for me. I went flying. We live and we learn, don't we, folks? So this is the world of accessibility, right? Making sure that people who have some kind of body difference feel welcome and have easy and equitable access to any kind of experience that we create, be it digital or in the real world. So a couple principles, of course, be people first. Include people in your design process. Make sure you are picking from a really broad subset of people to talk to and to include, to make sure that we're including a lot of diversity and difference in the people that we're including, right? If everybody looks like me, 38-year-old Hispanic white looking guys, right, who talk a lot, I'm not going to get a lot of valuable insight, right? A couple other best practices here to be really careful about are, and especially in the tech scene, this happens a lot, that we decide, oh, we need this new feature, or we need this new thing, or we need all these little tiny little things because they're cool, right? We want to make sure that we have a clear purpose of why people are coming to us. What is the goal or the need that they have? Why are they visiting us? And that we are making that as easy and as roadblock free as possible for them to accomplish their goals, right? Especially if they're using some sort of assistive technology. We want to make sure that we give them the clear roadways to accomplish those goals. And lastly, as a novice or an early designer, technologist, it might be really attractive. Oh, we want to make this our own. We want to make this unique. We want to make this different. Well, guess what? All of our users spend 99.9% of their time on a different app, on a different website, on millions of apps and websites. Right? There's a language to the web. There's a language to these apps. There are best practices and conventions of how we lay things out, how we connect the dots, how we give people that functionality. It is not good to just come up with our own way because we wanted to. Use the conventions and the best practices that are in place, because guess what? That's what your users are expecting, and that is what your users are used to, and they already know how to use those things. Right? They're called design patterns. Apply those, and guess what? You're on your way to success. Job's not over, but you're on your way to success. So now we're going to talk about inclusive design. And in my mind, as I said at the beginning, inclusive design is a little bit bigger, right? Inclusive design isn't just about people who might be experiencing some form of impairment, right? Inclusive design is literally anybody and everybody, right? And I love this quote. This is from the Microsoft inclusive design. They put a lot of attention into this. It's beautiful. Disability happens at the point of interaction between a person and society. It is not your problem. It is not my problem that I am unable to take advantage of this experience. It is the problem of the builder, right? Whoever constructed this experience, because we are excluding use from due to ignorance, lack of knowledge, lack of awareness from people who have maybe slightly different needs, right? So the goal here is to understand those differences, understand what those people needs, and create interactions and pathways that allow everybody to participate, right? So I had the pleasure of meeting with an amazing woman. Her name was Elise Roy. She is a big advocate of inclusive design, and she came into my classroom and kind of pitched a session for us. And she drew this diagram on the wall, and it blew my mind. This was like 8 years ago, right? And she really kind of went into the fact that there's kind of two ways to approach this thing, right? Especially if you're like, oh, there's no way that we could care for all of these tiny little edge cases. That's way too much work. That's impossible, right? So there's two ways that people tend to handle that, quote unquote. Is okay, what's the biggest group in our audience, right? What is the majority of our audience? Let's focus on them. Or option number two is let's design for average. Well, guess what? Nobody's average. Nobody's a C student across the board. Nobody is perfectly average on every dimension of their physical body, of their mental capacity, of their knowledge, of their ability. That person doesn't exist. So if we're designing for average, we're actually designing for nobody. Right? Fail. And think about all the people otherwise that we're excluding out here on the margins, right? People who probably need whatever it is that we're providing the most. So what's the opportunity? What's the difference? How can we do this differently? Instead, if we really, really focus on the edge cases, right? The extremes of use, the power user over here to the person who has never picked up an iPhone before in their life, right? If we can focus on their experiences, their needs, and what's going to take to make a meaningful experience for them, guess what? Then we really do capture everybody and everybody in between. There's a beautiful talk about this by a man named Todd Rose. He also wrote a book called The Death of Average. Awesome. I highly recommend it. It talks about how can we really create for everybody on the spectrum. Because guess what? If you include the person on either end, then you're including everybody in between. And then in the middle, really, you're just kind of tweaking, you're adjusting to make sure that everybody feels included. So here are some examples. There's so many of things that I think are really cool examples of inclusive design. Inclusive restrooms, right? Obviously, gender labeled restrooms are not welcoming of everybody. Instead, why not just have individual stalls? Split up that room, have individual stalls, have a door. Everybody's welcome in that bathroom. You don't have to stress it. Todd Rose talks a lot about creating adjustable seats in cockpits in fighter planes with the Air Force. This is an example for us who are not as intense, right? Desks that are adjustable, right? Or the desks that you can kind of prop up, right? Depending on how tall you are, how low you are, if you're sitting in a wheelchair, if you're sitting in one chair or another, right? These things, being able to adjust them allows you to personalize them for you. I love this one. No personal use, unfortunately, but Fenty apparently. Rihanna's beauty brand, when they first came on the scene, they had over 50 different types of shades of makeup, right? Because so many women struggle to find their right shade with a brand that only has 5 to 10, right? Guess what? You might feel, oh, that's a lot of work. But who do you think gets more sales now? Rihanna's crushing it. Rihanna's a billionaire. You know why? Because not only is she opening herself up to more people, more clients, those women feel more seen, more understood, more welcome, and are more loyal to her and her brand because they were able to find a perfect shade that perfectly matches them. I see myself represented in that brand, right? Beautiful. So I know, man, I got 3 minutes. I talk too much. So 3 quick principles of inclusive design, then we'll move on. Try to recognize exclusion. I'll give us some tips on how to do that, right? Learn from diversity. Don't shoot it down and be like, oh, you're different. That sucks. No, how can we welcome those people and learn from their experiences, learn from their point of view? I'll tell you another story about this. My wife is Caucasian. She's wonderful. She's beautiful. I love her with all my life. Recently, she went on a flight and TSA, or the National, we live in DC, so the National Guard was checking IDs at the gate. Me, my Latin ass, excuse my language, I would have been like, yeah, no, I'm going to change my flight. I'm good. I'm not good. No, thank you. I'm all right. She still played her game of trying to skip lines, right, to get in an earlier group. I was like, my God, woman, the doll. Skipping your gate group with the National Guard right there. I would never. Right? When the National Guard came to DC, I started carrying around my passport, sadly. And then my parents came to visit and I told them, hey, make sure that you bring your passports just in case. And they're like, oh, we take our passports every time we traveled. We always have. And that blew my mind, right? My parents have an accent. They're from Puerto Rico. I was born in Puerto Rico as well, but they have a thick accent. They lived in Puerto Rico until their late 30s, early 40s. They're used to it, right? Me, I grew up in the United States since I was 6. It never crossed my mind, the fear of needing to have my passport on me when I'm traveling inside of my country. It's just things that we don't recognize. So principles of inclusive design: recognize, be aware, try to tease out, are we excluding anybody? How can we learn from everybody's different point of view, their needs, their experiences, how they operate, how they solve things? And then kind of like that principle of the spectrum, once we solve for the edges, how can we kind of extrapolate this for everybody in between? I'm going to keep on going until somebody cuts me off. We only got I got less than 10 minutes, I promise. So again, my little thesis here and my goal was, how do we apply this to our neighborhoods, to our communities, to this country, which is a beautiful place that I love and love to be, right? So I've got some principles for us to take away here. And like we've said, diversity is our greatest strength, right? America is a melting pot. We have so many beautiful people of so many different walks of life, and diversity looks so different in different ways. It's not cultural diversity. There's gender diversity, age diversity, intellectual, educational diversity, sexual orientation, so many ways that we are different, right? How can we harness this, learn from it, and therefore build opportunities, build technologies, build spaces that take that into account and are therefore more diverse, more welcoming, more inclusive, and guess what? More innovative. So, three quick tips, kind of like we just said. Learn from your neighbors, right? Learn who they are. The makeup of your neighborhood might be different than the makeup of my neighborhood, right? Understand what matters to them. What matters to you, what is really important to you, might be different than what's really important to me, right? Mobility for my grandma is different than it is for me, except for when I'm in a wheelchair because I tore my Achilles. And then, of course, invite these people from diverse situations, diverse points of view into the process to design with us. So, again, like I said, let's start with the people. Hey, guess what? Instead of making an assumption, right? Go talk to them. Ask them questions. Ask them about their day to day. Follow them around. Ask them about their goals, their needs, their feels, or their fears. Try to really understand what a day in their life is like. And if you're creating whatever it might be, a community event, a park, a space, we can represent that with that information, with that knowledge, and make sure that they feel welcome in that space. I love this. This is from an old movie, right? What happens if you assume, right? You make an ass out of you and me. Let's not assume. Let's ask questions. What a concept, right? Let's just ask questions to better understand that other person's point of view. Language and communication, right? If we're thinking about big public spaces, my poor grandma, every time we go home, my parents live in Florida, my grandma had to walk up to my wife and say, I do not speak English. And my wife is like, Mama Hina, I know you do not speak English. I still don't speak Spanish. I'm sorry, right? But how can we make sure that everybody can at least communicate, right? Who's been to a party or to a conference and it's like too packed and it's too loud and they're just like, this isn't for me, right? Get me out of here. I don't feel comfortable, right? Well, imagine somebody who doesn't speak English, right, walking into a community center or whatever else it might be. So making sure that we're representing language, making sure that we're representing things like hearing impairment, vision impairment, right, noise levels, personal communication preferences, right? Some people don't like a phone call. Some people rather text or email, whatever it might be, right? Some people might not have access to a smartphone or email, right? So if we're sending email invites, guess what? Our neighbor who's 80 might not get that email invite to the community party, right? Reading levels, small kids, right? Or people who are not native English speakers might not be able to read something in complex language, right? So kind of taking into account people's different levels and preferences and needs as it comes to how we communicate in these communal or societal spaces. Physical barriers, of course, if we're creating an in-person event or anything along those lines, right? Making sure that it's accessible physically for anybody who might have some mobility issues, making sure not only the physical space, but the signage, right? If our signage is only in English, that might be a problem. If our signage is hard to read, people might not make it to the right place. If our directions are unclear or confusing, we might not be able to make it to the right place. Man, I live in DC. I love our metro. I got some in-laws that live in New York. Every time we go up there, I am terrified of riding the subway by myself. I'm like, I'm going to get lost in the subway. They will not find me for years. I'm going to just become one with the subway. I'm going to be eating the rats and like just living down here so I'll never find my way out, right? If we're sending people on these long commutes or whatever it might be, right, with complicated steps, that might be a barrier. And again, technology, if we're sending an e-invite or whatever it might be a barrier for people to be able to feel welcome and take advantage of whatever it is that we're building and creating and inviting them to. And last but not least, cultural sensitivities. Think about a party. I was at an event about a month ago that was a comedy event for anybody, impacted in the Gaza conflict. And obviously people who are Muslim and devout Muslims don't drink alcohol. And I was like, hey, we should probably be sensitive to that, right? We should probably be aware that these people don't drink alcohol. Maybe we should not, right, in this situation. My poor brother-in-law, I love him to death. He is Jewish. Yes, my Boricua family literally took this poor man to an all-you-can-eat pork cookout. And I'm like, guys, seriously? There's nothing else we could have eaten other than like just pork. What's the guy going to do? He's like, well, I guess for the love of my sister, I'm just going to starve here today. Great. Right? Our culture as Latin people, as Hispanos, is so dear and important to us, right? So what's it like to really, especially if we're trying to welcome our neighbors, be better neighbors, love on our neighbors, understand what is their cultural background, color, right? In different places around the world, I think it's in South Africa that they use red to signify mourning. Mourning, as like we wear black to funerals, right? They wear red, right? Red is a big, is it Chinese New Year's? So color can play a role in cultural diversity. Holidays and religious practices through holidays, certain foods, right? All of these things can impact and just give a little hint to these people. Hey, you're thinking about me, how sweet, or you really didn't think about me, did you? Right? And that makes a difference on them feeling welcome or not. So, look at that. So again, just wanted to kind of carve out some time and give you guys some principles and some background and some information on how can we make our communities, our neighborhoods, the spaces that we create, the places that we live in and imbibe. That's not the right word. Imbibe is to drink. A better, more inclusive place where everybody that we interact with, all of our neighbors and friends, feel welcome, feel seen, feel respected, and that is through inclusive design and participatory design. As you can imagine, participatory design is exactly that, welcoming other people to design with us. And guess what? Our neighbors and our community members, they might not be architects or software designers or UX or product designers like me, or party planners or event planners, right? But guess what? They are really good and really knowledgeable in who they are, what their needs and preferences are, what their limitations are, and their cultures and their religions, right? So if we include them in the process of designing our community and our community spaces, they'll feel included, they'll feel seen, their needs and their viewpoints will be represented, and we'll be able to create spaces that are more inclusive, more innovative, and more welcoming to everybody that wants to be a part of it. So that is what I wanted to share here today. I know we're a little bit out of time. I would love to have taken some questions, but please, let's connect. This is my little LinkedIn QR code, my email, and my website over here on the left. Would love to connect, would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for hanging out and listening to me ramble on for a little while. It was a pleasure. And thank you so much to Techqueria for such a beautiful, beautiful event. Love the Latin community. Keep on thriving out there, friends. There will be a better day.